ahead and just do some housekeeping notes as people trickle in. Just going to say a big welcome and thank you to everyone in attendance. This is the third meeting we've now had of our special interest group, CERIP. Soon to be many more, I'm sure, but we are all about education reform, innovation, and policy out of the Education Reform and Innovation team at the University of Cambridge's Faculty of Education, led by the lovely Elaine Wilson, who is my supervisor on the screen. With much support from Elena, from Julie, and from Paula on our team. Thank you to them for all their hard work here. I would invite everyone, if you would feel comfortable, to go ahead and rename yourself with your organizational affiliation in the chat, just so that Marcelo can get an idea of who's in the room if he's looking around and where you're coming from. We are going to ask everyone to stay muted, if possible, until we get to the question and answer session, and let you know that this meeting is being recorded. So if for any reason you do not want your video or voice to appear, you can feel free to pop a message in the chat and I will read it for you, and you can keep your video off and not be seen. Without further ado, though, I think I'm going to get started and introduce the lovely Marcelo here. So we are incredibly lucky to be able to have Marcelo here speaking with us today. He is a longtime research scientist. He is an educational change leader, a principal, and an educator. Most fundamentally, I am sure, he is currently lecturing at the University of Sussex and working with UNICEF, working with Uzbekistan on national curricular design, running courses, working with dozens of organizations. He's a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Education. He's a trustee of the Laurel Trust. He sits on the committee of the White Hawk Football Club and is a founding fellow of the Chartered College of Teaching. So many, many things. He is going to be sharing with us today his work over many years about the joy of not knowing, which again is the culmination of years and years of his work. So I'm going to invite Marcelo now to talk a little bit about himself, his work, how it got started, and do some fun activities with us before I do some questioning and open it up to the audience. So without further ado, Marcelo, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the seminars, the CERIP seminars. The first two of which I came to and absolutely loved and found incredibly inspirational. So I feel very privileged and very honoured to now have the possibility and the opportunity to chat with yourself. So thank you so much. Yeah, it's wonderful to be with you.
And feel free, Marcelo, do you need any screen sharing? Are you ready to go with your?
Yes, I've got the presentation to share, but I thought that first of all, Adam, I just wanted to give a little bit of sort of context and background of how everything evolved during my life and my career, and how it has now culminated, like you say, in the philosophy of education and of school leadership, which has become known as the joy of not knowing, which is a fabulous feeling to think that it's going to all come together following my career in education and, like you said before, in science. So yes, so I started off as a scientist looking at liver cells, lactic acid transport to liver cells, and then looking at the structure of red blood cells. So my previous life, I was a research scientist. And then I did a PGCE in Bristol and moved to a career in primary teaching, which I've loved every second of since making the move. And just this a number of very fortunate events happened very early on in my career. I was invited to take part in my first 2 years as a teacher within a project which was called Flying High in Bristol, which encompassed 12 schools, primary and secondary schools, all working together on an action research project looking at provision for what was then called more able children. And that was a really, really transformational moment for me, because I started to see that there was so many exciting things that all the schools were focusing on that were making a huge difference to the way that children perceived the teaching and learning process. And what I started to do was to incorporate all those ideas that I was seeing into the everyday life of the classroom. And that's what started to become really, really exciting. I could see very quickly how these ideas started to make the children really, really enjoy the time together. It started to create, I became very involved with philosophy for children and developing a philosophical approach to the curriculum, creating classrooms that function as a community of inquiry, presenting the learning in a very thought-provoking way, so promoting a creative thinking approach, developing, offering children ways of structuring their thinking, so giving them strategies like mind mappings and PMIs and using de Bono's hats. And, you know, sort of, I noticed that it was really exciting to develop a way of presenting the learning to the children where there was, it was based on discussion, dialogue, talk. And what I started to realize that if one did those, presented it in that way, then the students and the children were very enthusiastic and eager to start to engage with the process of learning, because they started to feel that there wasn't always a right and wrong answer. And very importantly, I think what it created, started to create, was an atmosphere in the classroom where the students and the children felt that we were co-constructing the learning together. And that's what I think really started to develop my enthusiasm as a teacher to keep developing the various strategies that have now come together as a whole philosophy of education. So I became very involved with, did a project with the University of Bristol called the Effective Lifelong Learning Inventory, the ELLI project. And that was looking at how we could introduce lifelong learning dispositions into the primary classroom. And so all these, the philosophy of lifelong learning, the creative thinking, all of this sort of started to take shape as a teacher, which was really, really exciting. And then when I moved back to Brighton, went into senior leadership, deputy head, and then headship of 2 schools, where I then started to develop a more strategic approach to the whole process, which has now become known as the joy of not knowing. And the really interesting concept and idea that I wanted to share with you all today was the key to realizing what was happening that was making the children enjoy the learning so much. And I think if I can point to one thing that this way of presenting the learning to the children was creating, is that I realized that it was doing, it was removing the fear of not knowing. It was removing the worry of coming to something new with anxiety. It was removing all those kinds of natural feelings that we have when we're about to learn and we realize that we don't know it. So that's where the phrase of the joy of not knowing was coined when I was the head of Hertford Infants Nursery School, because it became clear that in developing a joy for not knowing, that it was creating the enthusiasm, it was creating children that then developed an intrinsic motivation to want to learn. So yes, it was, there's a huge combination of factors that have come together. But the really interesting thing, and why I'm so interested to be sharing these ideas with yourself, is that I've always taken a very research-based approach to all these initiatives. So I've always felt very free in the classroom to experiment and to try things out and to see how things worked, and to be very, very clear with the children that this was something new that I didn't know, and all those sorts of things. So it's very interesting how, if one allows, enables, creates that culture in schools where action, research, experimentation, taking risks with learning is encouraged, then I feel that the possibilities are endless in terms of what one can achieve and what one can do in terms of reform and innovation. So what I was going to do now is show you how all this kind of works in practice, and share with you the principles and philosophies, the main principles and philosophies that that are behind the approach, and give you an idea of how the various factors have come together into a very exciting and practical way. So what I wanted to start with is that I think everything that I've been describing so far that has led to such wonderful learning cultures and learning environments in the classroom, I think can be traced back to this lovely comment and quote that Einstein used to say, where he used to say that he never taught his students, he just created the conditions in which they could learn. And I think that's, that's something that's I hold so dear, because what I really admire and I really appreciate and I really value is the view, is how children feel. So it's the perception of children, process of learning, of teaching and learning, is how they are perceiving it. So all these ideas are designed to remove the traditional concept that the teacher has all the knowledge to impart on the children, and to make the children feel that when they enter the classroom, they're entering a community of inquiry where all the learning and all the discussion and all the chat and all the adventures that happen during the day, because in a primary classroom it is every day is an amazing adventure, is all co-constructed and all takes the embraces the richness that every child brings with them. And I'll share with you some examples of how that how that's achieved, particularly through what I refer to as a multilingual thinking in a multicultural classroom environment approach. So these, I think that concept is really key. And the other thing that I wanted to present with you, and maybe you might, the delegates might want to have a quick go on jotting these things down on the bit of paper, just to get us focused on the kind of thinking that has led to all this, or that now in schools explains all this to practitioners and to the children in practice. And it's based on the concept of trying to create the conditions in which we can make children feel comfortable with being uncomfortable. And the reasoning is really interesting. These are called concept lines. So a concept line is a strategy that is used with opposites at either ends to enable children to think without worrying that there's a right or wrong answer. So they they have to think about two scenarios, but there's always a continuum of an answer in between. So, and wherever they place their thinking, the idea is that they can justify their thinking, and everyone's thinking could be different. So the concept lines are really, really fabulous. And within the whole philosophical approach to teaching and learning, they play an enormous role. So in this case, what I've done is I've created concept lines based on what I think is kind of human nature and human emotion, and how we are as humans. So on the left-hand side here are words that define what I feel makes us feel comfortable. So when we know the answer to things, when we know things, when we're not confused, when we feel within our comfort zone, when we feel that we're certain about things, when we think that things are possible to achieve, when we think we have the knowledge, and when we think that the person that's teaching us has the expertise, we tend to feel comfortable. Don't you think, Adam? That's kind of human nature that kind of makes us feel comfortable in those scenarios. But the funny thing is, and I'll show you in a second later how this works. The funny thing is that when we agree that we feel comfortable, the thinking then becomes very interesting, because if we are in these positions and if we are feeling like this, I believe that that does not lead to any learning. So what is really interesting to explicitly discuss with the children and with the teachers and with the senior leaders is that in order for learning to actually take place, we need to be in these positions. By definition, we have to not know it first. So the whole concept of the joy of not knowing is based on the fact that in order to learn something new, we have to not know it first. So we, by definition, when we're learning, we're in a position of not knowing, which is uncomfortable. We are confused. You know, I always say to the children, the more confused you are, the better, because it is in the unraveling of that confusion and feeling comfortable with confusion that the wonder happens. It's when we're uncomfortable, when we're beyond our, you know, stepping outside our comfort zone, when we feel uncertain, when we're not sure if things are possible, when we think that, you know, initially you present the children with a task, and when you present the learning philosophically with the children, it's really interesting because the original presentation, they think that's impossible to do. So for example, if a class is doing something to do with multiplication or measure or geography, it's a really interesting way of introducing the learning in that topic and the introduction of that lesson by asking them to work out, to ask them how many children would it take holding hands or COVID distance to go all the way around the world. So they, you know, first of all, they find it hilarious. They think it's really funny, and then they think that's impossible. But as soon as they then start to think strategically through that problem, they realize that it's actually possible to get to a good approximation. So they then say, oh, we can measure, you know, how long 10 of us in the classroom measure, and then we can work out what the circumference of the earth is, and then we can multiply across. So very quickly, this way of presenting the learning takes the children from thinking it's impossible to actually, yes, I can actually achieve this, which is really, really exciting. So if when the learning is presented and the children think, oh, that's really easy, that's really possible, that's when the intrinsic motivation is not at its best. I think it's at its best when people think is doing things way beyond what they've ever done or expected. And the lovely thing with philosophy, which works brilliantly as well, the philosophical approach to learning and asking them philosophical questions and developing the learning objective as a philosophical question is really captivating for children, because I believe they feel that they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing at school. So it's when they come in across that excitement of, oh, this isn't like the normal expectation, this is something extra, different, more exciting, then they engage with it. But behind the approach is a very interesting concept of getting them to think critically and creatively through what's going to be the basis of the learning. So it's when we feel that when we're not sure, because there's a really interesting difference between knowledge and understanding. And in the next line, when we do a little exercise, you'll see that that's a very exciting thing to explore, where children often think that once they get the answer and they have the knowledge, that's enough. But then they don't often make the explicit link to understanding it. So how well can they use that knowledge in a different context? How well can, is that knowledge to understanding is really, really fascinating. And the model of having kind of knowledge, sort of if you imagine sort of lots of dots jotted around, that's knowledge, and understanding is those dots connected. So it's a really lovely visual for the children to differentiate. And that's really important for in young children as well, because they think that having knowledge is enough, and getting the answer is enough. But what this does is saying the answer is just the beginning of my curiosity, of asking more questions, of finding more things about it, of being able to use it in a different context, to be able to apply it within a certain principle. And when you feel that you are leading your own learning, that can be quite scary as well, if they don't feel they have all the tools that they need. And I'll show you in a second how there's a process that's at the heart of the approach that makes sure that all the children feel that they have everything that they need. And that's to do with actually teaching it to them, which is really funny. And that's the concept of launching the academic year. This is one of the main takeaway tasks today, and I'd love to discuss this with the audience. The idea of launching the academic year with a learning to learn week, where the children, there's 5 days designed in a way that equips, first of all, that sets the conditions in the classroom that create that values-led community of inquiry, rich, dialogue-rich, respect children's rights, rich, global sustainability-rich, creates those conditions in which the children can learn, and also gives them the strategies, the tools, and the dispositions of effective learners. So then they feel at the end of that week, they feel that they can tackle anything and everything. And whether they can or not, this is really interesting, to me doesn't matter. What really matters in all of this is how they feel. So they feel equipped, they feel as experts in learning, they feel that they can achieve, they feel they've been given everything that they need, they feel that they're working within a respectful culture in which they can ask questions, take risk, listen to each other, discuss. The values-led culture so it's how they feel. But I don't know if any in the audience have kind of mentally made a picture, but these are lovely to have in the classrooms as well as big displays, because then these lines move up and down. So there's active displays in the classroom, work absolutely brilliantly with all of this. And then I'll show you how these can be done for lifelong learning dispositions as well. But the main thing, and the discussion of today is based on this model, which I'm absolutely delighted to share with yourselves, because it can have a very, very transformational impact. It's very simple, but it can have a very transformational impact on the lives of children and adults, and on the way that they perceive learning and themselves as learners for the rest of their lives. It's just a really wonderful thing. And this is one of the first things that they meet in the Learning to Learn week process on day one. But in order to really bring this to the fore, I will need 2 lovely volunteers, please, from the audience, if that's possible. We're going to try and do, if we were together in a room, it'd be wonderful, and it'd be like this photograph here. You can see the children at the school all sitting around the pit, and I would then take them through it. So this is their first day in of the academic year, and they are going through this process at school that you can see there. But
so I would invite people to raise their hands virtually using the reactions function if you'd
will
like.
there be 2 people who would kindly volunteer to take part in this?
We've got 1 hand.
Taylor.
Okay. Taylor, perfect. I'm going to move you to the spotlight if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Tyler.
Perfect. Any other hands? Anyone else want to jump on in? We just need 1 more. Paula. Okay, let's go, Paula. Fantastic. Putting you in the. Ooh, Paula's gone. Paula, thank you so much. So Paula and Tyler, thank you so much. This is absolutely wonderful. So what happens here is that this model describes a model of learning and of teaching as well. So it's a whole teaching and learning process, all within a model called the PIT model of learning. So what happens is that everything in life starts here. This is the learning objective. Anything that we have to do in life, anything at all, any problem we have to solve, anything we have to do, anything at all that we have to achieve, anything in life, and not just in school, not just in learning, anything at all starts here. Okay. So Tyler and Paula, you are now standing here at 1. Yeah. How are you feeling? What's going through? How are you feeling now that you've volunteered and you're standing here and you're not sort of quite sure what's going to happen? How are you feeling inside?
Thinking about how steep that slope is. It's like, oh, what's coming next?
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So a little bit worried about the steepness of the slope. Brilliant. Thank you, Tyler. How are you feeling, Paula?
Yeah, just got me that idea that before you go down on a roller coaster.
So is that making you feel anxious? Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'm so pleased that you're feeling worried, that you're feeling anxious, that you're feeling sort of uncertain about what's going to happen, that you're feeling kind of not within your comfort zone at the moment. That is brilliant. That's really, really good. And what this is trying to then model is that that's probably how the children feel when they come to learn at every lesson, or when they walk to school, when they come into school. So my whole career in education has been focused on trying to remove that anxiety, that worry, that uncertainty, that kind of negative feeling to engaging. So I think, I really think that the key to learning, the key to innovation, the key to effective practice is at 1, is how the individual feels at 1, that then either enables them to launch with excitement to learning, or not to engage with learning at all, or to have a really bad experience and then not want to do it again. So I think 1 is the most critical thing. And there's so many lovely ideas that we can discuss in terms of how we make 1 a really special place to be. But okay, so Tyler, so at 1, so I'm going to ask you a question now. Where were you born?
Hawaii.
In Hawaii. Amazing. That's really, really interesting. Thank you.
I know. Why am I here in this country with this weather? But, yeah.
That's a good question. It's a very good question we can ask at the end. So what happens here is that I've asked a question and Tyler knew the answer. So what Tyler can do is he can jump from 1 all the way to 5. So you can jump across a bit. Can we see you jump across, Tyler?
No.
Okay. In normal life, the children jump across. So you've jumped across the pit. So
Yeah.
Thank you. How are you feeling now, Paula?
If you're gonna ask me the same question,
And
a bit frustrated because it's not in Hawaii.
okay. And do you think it will be the same question? What's your kind of thinking?
Well, that could be, but that will be always a doubt until you actually do it.
Yes. Do you think it might be a little bit more tricky for you?
Yeah.
It could be. Okay. So the question to you, Paula, is where was I born?
That is tricky because if you just had your first name, I would say that you were born exactly where I was in Brazil. But then by your
hang
second
on,
name,
hang on. Do you know or don't you know?
No, I don't.
You don't know. Brilliant. Brilliant. That is brilliant that you don't know. And that is the time when children's lives change. Because they say, in saying I don't know, and the teacher celebrated and saying, have anybody ever told you, Paula, that it's brilliant you don't know?
No.
No. So this is it. It's brilliant that you don't know, and you'll see why in a second. It's absolutely brilliant you don't know. I'm delighted you don't know. I'm delighted you're confused, uncertain, and you don't know the answer. That's brilliant. So what can you do now, Paula, that you don't know?
I could ask.
Brilliant. So what we do, exactly. So what you do is you can come into 3. You can underslope into 3, and in 3 you use everything that you possess, you have, all your strategies, the way you collaborate, the way you ask questions, you can research, so and ask others, anything at all that's in your kind of problem solving toolbox, you can now use to try and work out what the answer to the problem. So what sort of strategies could you come to mind, Paula?
Well, if I'm in a classroom, I would ask a colleague, a friend, or I would research. I will go back to the instructor, or
Brilliant,
I will use the hints I had to make
Brilliant. So what could you do now?
I can ask you, where are you from?
Yes, brilliant. You can ask me. Brilliant. So what this is really interesting for the children when you're actually doing it and modeling is that, yes, going to the teacher or going to the person that they knows is an option, but it's really interesting for them to also start to think of other options. So maybe in the audience, and I know, we had a pre-chat before the talk, so I was talking about my life, so I know the people in the pre-chat know. I also know there's another special person in the audience that very closely related that also knows. So it's getting the children to feel that asking the teacher, as it were, is not may be the last resort, and then to think creatively of other ways of doing it. So yeah, in this case, yeah, you could ask somebody in the audience, or you could ask me, but whichever you choose, or you could research it, or what would you like to do, Paula?
I would ask the audience.
Ask somebody in the audience. Okay, go on then.
Okay, who could help me to discover where Marcelo is from? Raise your hand.
I don't know how to raise my hand on this thing. Can you hear me?
Hello, Dominique.
Hi, sorry. I think you can use strategies like you did when you started, is looking at the name, which is not a name that is English. So you can guess maybe it comes from a country like Brazil, you mentioned, or Italy or Spain or something like that. So you can find cognitive strategies to try and guess.
Sure, you can make really good educated guesses, absolutely right. And that's brilliant for children, yes. Excellent, yes. Is there anybody that would like to help Paolo that actually knows the answer?
You can ask me, Paolo. My hand is raised. This is Adam.
Okay, Adam, you know it all. Please tell me.
Absolutely. So Marcelo is in fact Argentinian.
Oh God.
Okay, so now you found the answer. What you can do is you can come out and climb into and onto 5 again. So what's really interesting now for the children is that you both started in the same place and you both finished in the same place. But when you ask the children that when Tyler knew the answer, was really happy and he jumped across the pit, did he learn anything? It's an amazingly transformational moment, because the children say, no, he didn't learn anything because he already knew it. Yeah, so Tyler, you didn't learn anything new. Whereas Paolo, when you didn't know something and you came through this, you're now here with more knowledge, haven't you? Aren't you? You now know something new that you didn't know before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea then is that the children realize that in order to learn something new, you have to not know it first. And that's the real excitement of being here in the position of not knowing, because they realize that it's not something that's a deficit or fault of them. It's by definition is where we all are when we are starting to learn something new or to learn anything at all. And what's really interesting is that I was doing this with a year 4 class once, and one child said, Mr. S, you're completely wrong. When I jumped across the pit, I did learn something new. And I said, what do you mean, Charlie? And he said, well, it's obvious. When I jumped across, I learned that I already knew it. And I just thought that was such an amazing concept for a child to think about, because that's that metacognitive process of thinking about what they know that they know. And that's really at the heart of this, because what children start to do when they get used to this kind of way of thinking about them, about the learning process and themselves as learners, is that when they're at 1, they start to think about what they know about what they're going to learn, but also what they know that they don't know about what they're about to learn, which is really, really exciting, because then they have a choice. And this is where the intrinsic motivation comes in, because we all know that there are lots of things that we don't know, but we might not be interested in getting to know those things. So the conditions that are created in the classroom make the children develop the intrinsic motivation with which they then go to 1 to 2 is intrinsic motivation, to start to engage with the learning. And at 2, they're thinking that they want to know what they know that they don't know. And that's really, really key, a very key, it's really simple, but it's such a key aspect. If the child wants to know what they know they don't know, then the learning in the classroom takes a completely different perspective, because they're not doing it for an extrinsic motivation, they do it intrinsically. And then they go into 3 is really exciting, because as you'll see in the next slide, they want to go to 3 because they know that at 3 they'll be able to know how to know what they want to know that they know they don't know. And that is the key, and that's what that's what started to really drive my excitement in presenting the learning in this way to the children, and to creating the conditions in which this was the kind of language and concepts that we were engaging, using to engage them in the curriculum content. And then this is really interesting, because 4, the cycling between 3 and 4 is not always very explicitly shared with the children. And what this does, and this is a big display in the classroom, so children are always saying, I'm at 1, I'm at 2, I'm at 3, I'm at 4, and they talk about themselves going through the learning process, which is really interesting. But the cycling between 3 and 4 is really interesting, because as they're learning, they're always reflecting back and forth as to how that learning is going. So they think, you know, that's gone really well, I can now do the next step, or that was a bit tricky, I need to try different strategies. So they're always thinking metacognitively about how well the learning is going and reflecting on the learning and looking at different ways of doing things or seeing if that was successful moving on. So there's constant reflection, and eventually they get to 4 and they work out that they've now resolved the problem, found the answer, and can move to 5. And 5 is really fascinating because it's what we were saying earlier about the difference between knowledge and understanding. So at 5, you have the knowledge. So Paula, now you have the knowledge that I was born in Argentina and in Buenos Aires. But does that, what that does is just, it encourages you to then go to 6, because in 6, is where you develop your curiosity. So now that you have more knowledge than you had before, hopefully that's triggered loads of questions about me being born in Argentina. And, you know, all sorts of questions would probably come into your mind. When did I come over? Do I speak Spanish? You know, what's it like? What, you know, all sorts of things are now coming to you as a result of having that new knowledge. So that's what 6 encourages the children to do in the classroom, to be curious about the new knowledge and not to see the new knowledge as the answer, but just as the beginning of lots more adventures. It's also a really exciting stage for them to think about how well they've understood things, how well they've mastered things. So with this model, it's so easy. The teacher can say, well, go, once you've got the answer, go back into 3 and try and climb out again, having got to the same answer using a different strategy. So that's when the children really realize if they've understood something well, is when they can use a different strategy to get to the same answer. Or they love coming back in and helping, being, you know, acting in the role of the teacher to help somebody else come out. So this is a very wonderful, simple way of explaining a whole philosophy of education to the children, making them feel really comfortable with not knowing, making them realize that we're all learning at different steps when we're learning. And also it invites them to enter into the period in their own way. So there's another a big display that goes on the wall where the children can either spend a bit of time here before they go down the slide, or which is usually is turned into a swimming pool in that model, or they can enter the swimming pool down the steps, very slowly down the steps, or they can jump into the water, or can they dive in through the, you know, go on the diving water, dive in. So they also know that they can enter into the learning in their own way and at their own depth. So that's the kind of main concept, and then it all comes together through the idea of having a learning to learn week at the beginning of the academic year. Because what I also realized, apart from all these things taking the worry away from the children, what I then also realized that it was really exciting to explicitly teach all these things to the children. So teaching them how to learn as well as what to learn became a really exciting prospect. So spending those first 5 days, getting them to think very, very deeply about how they feel as learners and how well they feel equipped to learn and how well the classroom community of inquiry is created. It's just really, really wonderful. And the approach describes 5 main sort of themes that are covered during that week. So individual models of learning and equating education to the model of architecture, which I'll share with you in a second. So kind of analogies and models of learning to make every child feel like they're an expert as a learner, then giving them loads of strategies that enable them to develop their creative thinking skills and thinking creatively around the knowledge. Lots of strategies enable them to structure their thinking visibly. All the wonderful things to do with philosophy and philosophical questions and a philosophical approach to the curriculum, and then giving them and sharing with them the lifelong learning dispositions. And this is the within this culture, which is also created within the clubs. And so it's values-based, vision-based, children's rights-based, lifelong learning based, and connected to the global sustainability goals and community. So everything comes together within that culture. So it makes the school feel like a microcosm of society. That's what I really enjoy, to recreate society within the classroom environment. This is really interesting because the whole, you know, we're saying that it's all about being at one and how they feel. The model I wanted to share with yourselves, which is really interesting, that makes every child feel as an expert in learning, is an analogy with architecture. The analogy with architecture is based on the fact that if we think about architects, they have a very, very detailed plan of what they want to achieve before they start to build it. Before they start, they know exactly what they want to achieve, the dimensions, the materials. They know to the nth degree the exact plan. They have the exact plan of how it's going to work out. So they know exactly what they want and they plan it out. They then get experts to help them make that plan come true, to construct the actual construction that they're trying to build. So they get expert plumbers, expert electricians, expert structural engineers, and they get different types of experts which all come together, all collaborate to create one thing. And the classroom is exactly the same. And sharing this with the children is so transformational, because the teacher says to them that, like architects, the school and the teacher also has strategic plans, yearly plans, medium-term plans. The teachers also have plans of what they want to achieve. And they then they ask the children, who do you think are the experts that are going to help me ensure that those plans come to fruition? And then when the children realize that it's them, and then they are the experts, and each one of them brings a certain expertise, like the plumber, electrician, all their expertise comes together to help the teacher build, make the teacher's plans come to fruition. So it's a really, really lovely way of ensuring that every child feels that they are an expert in learning, helping the communal learning to actually develop and come to fruition. And this is really interesting as well. The model of the fastest car in the world is to also ensure that the children feel that they're all equally intelligent. So the analogy is that the fastest car in the world, so if you imagine the engine is like intelligence, it's no good having the most intelligent, being the most intelligent person in the world, or having the most powerful engine, if you're not able to drive it. So if you come in here and you can't drive it, then the car will crash. So it's the idea is that everybody is equally intelligent and everybody's able to steer with the thinking skills and everything they get provided, steer the intelligence. So that's really, really wonderful. And then comes, as part of that first day as well, to make them all feel equally valued as learners, comes the idea of getting the children to develop their own model of learning. And I wonder if if people in the audience today might want to have a little go at developing this. But the idea is that every child on the first day develops their own model of learning and describes it, illustrates it, and then it's up on the wall at the end of the day. So they go home at the end of the day all feeling equally valued as learners. And these are really, really amazing. So they could be anything at all, and every child describes completely their own way of viewing learning. So for example, this one describes the learning as a maze. So they go into the maze, they don't know where the exit is. they go along. Sometimes they get stuck, they have to start again, but eventually they find their way out, and that's when they've learned. And this is a year 1 child who is amazingly really fascinated by with dinosaurs, and interpreted the model that we've just gone through by saying that before he starts learning, he's in the prehistoric times, and then he goes into the pit, learns, and comes out into human time. So it's using what children are naturally passionate about, how they relate, and creating a model of learning that they feel applies to them and is individual. And this is a really lovely one. My learning model is like turning a computer on, and they've crossed out loading and put learning, which is really, really genius. But the value of these, which is really interesting, is that these are then used by the teacher to discuss learning with the children throughout the year. So you use the language of their models to have those feedback conversations with the children, which is really, really powerful. There was one hugely transformational moment when a child said that her learning model was, this was in year 5, a roundabout. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I feel that since reception, I've just been going round and round and round without ever being able to learn anything. You know, she articulated it for the first time in year 5, and then we spent the whole year finding exits out of the roundabout as we were talking about her learning, and her life was completely transformed in terms of how she then viewed her learning process. So these are really, really powerful in terms of making them feel so first of all, experts in contributing to the co-construction of the classroom to enable the plans to come true, but they do it in their own way through their individual learning models. And just to give you a sort of an overall picture, when you're at 1, how all these ideas actually make children feel, which is I think the key to then developing an exciting engagement with the curriculum, is that they feel as experts of learning within the classroom. They feel equally valued, they feel equally intelligent, they feel able to thrive, and that's in the community of inquiry. They're thriving academically, they're thriving socially, and they're thriving emotionally. So that's the ability to feel that they can thrive is really, really exciting. And very importantly, through the concept we've just gone through, they feel that they don't have to worry. So it takes all those barriers of engagement, of that first kind of worry about engaging with the learning completely away, and transforms it into an enthusiasm for wanting to learn. And then, as we saw earlier, they also feel equipped to succeed, because you saw in that learning to learn week process, they feel everything they need, they get given everything they need to then succeed. So you can imagine how wonderful this is, and you get to know the children so well in that first week as individuals and as learners, that then when the curriculum comes is hugely, hugely wonderful. And when the curriculum comes, then there's another little idea that I wanted to show you. When the curriculum comes, then that's the engagement process.
Really quickly, Marcelo, this is so fantastic. I just want to let you know we only have about 5 minutes, and I wanted to have a little bit of time for questions. So
okay.
Definitely feel free to finish up. We can keep going.
Sure. I'll just very, very quickly go through. It's just embracing the opportunity for them to come to get to the learning and interact with the learning in using a multilingual approach and the multicultural. So everything that the richness that they bring with them, they can use to engage with it. So it's not just engaging in the language of instruction. And then they create in the day 5, they create a recipe for a lifelong learner, and they even then go and make it at home. So they in the ingredients for lifelong learning, they get to know during that first week what makes an effective lifelong learner, and they they then make it at home, as Charlie is showing there. So, and then the philosophical approach is designed to get them to engage with all areas of the curriculum through an open-ended, question-based philosophical approach. And then this is just another lovely example of a child in Spain who interpreted this process and called it the pit of happiness, el hoyo de la felicidad, which I just wanted to share with yourselves, because it's you know, if one can achieve very young children to feel that when they don't know, they're actually in a pit of happiness, then yeah, it's wonderful. So yeah, quick tour through the principles and main philosophies and strategies that that comprise all of this.
Absolutely fantastic, Marcelo. Thank you so much. I think we need a whole other session to get into so much, because you, in your book, lay out all these different ways to approach the kind of co-creative process as well. How do you actually map educational values and purpose with kids? You know, how do you actually implement this in the day-to-day in the classroom? So incredibly rich, and I'm sure that everyone would love to hear more. They can pick up a copy of your book as well, which we'll plug again at the end, but we can schedule more time to talk as well. I would invite anyone to raise their hands and additionally post their comments and questions in the chat so we can read them out. But I'm going to start with 2 questions of my own, and we can keep adding them in, and hopefully keep Marcelo a little bit over time to share his thoughts with us if he is amenable. So after hearing you talk about this, you know, incredible model and philosophy, have a few main things that come to mind. The first is you have this deeply comprehensive idea of teaching kids the joy of learning and transforming education. What did you have to eliminate from this model over years and years of working to develop it? I'm curious what you removed to get to this really coherent vision of the joy of not knowing, and why did those things not make it into your ultimate educational vision?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Adam. That is really fascinating. I guess looking back at how all this developed, what I eliminated was kind of imposed structure and imposed imposed ways of being. I always felt that I wanted to follow the way I thought would be best for the children, rather than what I thought that was being imposed on me. So I guess I removed that kind of worry of having to comply with kind of traditional systems or things that are imposed. That first couple of years when all of this created, amazingly coincided with the National Literacy and Numeracy Strategy being introduced, where we were being forced to teach. I'm sure you remember, with, you know, first 5 minutes this, then the next 10 minutes this, and you know, it was a very, very prescribed way. Needless to say, I never did it, even though I was an NQT, and that's what we had to do, because I just believed in something different. So I guess I eliminated the feeling that I had to conform in various ways that I didn't feel were sort of conducive to children's learning or enjoyment.
Fantastic. And I wonder too, when you're thinking about this model, it resonates with so many of the kind of innovations or just honestly long-standing approaches that have existed in kind of educational spaces, thinking about Montessori learning, right, which is all about creating this sort of enabling environment around the child, or more modern things like you know, strategic video gaming and developing kind of these creative and problem-solving abilities through intrinsic motivation. I'm curious how you see this model fitting in with complementing missing pieces of these existing structures, and how that maybe has worked when you've implemented this in places around the world.
Yes, it's really, really interesting, Adam, to consider the various models. And, you know, we had such wonderful examples in your previous sessions from Finland and from India and Sweden and so I think the one that resonates the most with my approach is a Reggio Emilia philosophy and approach to education, where it's so child-centered and so kind of stemming from children's interests, and like we were saying, it just provides the conditions in which they can explore and learn. And what I think is really interesting, and I'm doing quite a lot of really interesting work, as you mentioned earlier, with the lovely people in Uzbekistan, is to then try and create the conditions in which that kind of very special early years pedagogy can be supported and transported and enabled further up the school. And that's what I feel the Joy of Not Knowing approach really allows and liberates, because it creates what's called an intellectually playful approach to teaching and learning. So everything, I've got hundreds of examples here to show you of children where the children have been able to play intellectually with the learning to produce something that would never ever be achieved if you just stuck to the national curriculum. I'll just show you one really amazing example, which is this chart. So this is it's called a 4-4s challenge, where the children, you know, having come to the end of a mathematics topic, they set a challenge of having to use a 4-4s each time with any mathematical operation to create every number. So 4 add 4 divided by 4 add 4 makes 1. So I do. And 4 divided by 4 add 4 divided by 4 is 1 add 1 makes 2, and so on. These children went forth after that introduction to the challenge. They went home, 4 of them, for a weekend, spent a weekend and then brought that in, where they did every number to 150. We're using factorials, we're using 4 to the power 0, we're using 4 squared, 4 cubed, 4 square root. And I'm still in touch with one of them, and it says I still haven't done factorials at university, but they were playing intellectually with that knowledge and developing that love for maths and for number that would never come across if they just get given another worksheet of sums to do. So I believe that the whole of the curriculum can be approached in that way. There's always an intellectually playful challenge to give them and to inspire them with, which is the 5 to 6.
That's absolutely fantastic. I love that chart. And again, anyone, please feel free to pop questions into the chat, and we can call on you.
And at the other end of the spectrum, you know, I was talking about giving them visible thinking skills. So the children are taught on the 3rd day to mind map. This is a child from reception, and we saw the concept lines today, the concept lines. So they taught about concept lines as well. These children in reception were chatting about healthy eating, and so this child decided to create a mind map of the things that she considers to be of healthy foods and healthy eating, which is absolutely wonderful for a child in reception. But then, incredibly, without anyone saying anything, she then created a concept line to show which fruits she likes best to least. And I just can't think of a better example of equipping them with everything they need to be able to succeed, and then them actually feeling that they're within a learning to learn culture that allows them to portray that naturally. There was no one said do a mind, no one said to add a concept line. And these are for very, very early on. If these children have that motivation to want to engage with the learning, then I just think we are creating the conditions in which they're able to learn.
Absolutely. And I wonder, this kind of goes to your point about Uzbekistan. I'm wondering if you can point to any specific challenges of incorporating this model in various contexts. And I wonder specifically, when you're thinking about co-creation and values and intrinsic motivation, how you have maybe been, again, challenged in contextualizing that if, for example, you're co-creating and a community really prefers a different form of instruction or a different type of knowledge. How do you reconcile that? And have you run into that or other challenges that kind of preclude this model from taking?
Yes, that's really, really, really interesting, Adam. And it's at the heart of the whole approach. And I think that what really, really excites me is that it's an approach that's not set. It's just a set of ideas that enables everyone to adapt and to develop it according to their own ethos, their own values, their own visions. So, for example, it sets out how one can create and develop a set of values for their own institution, for their own school, based on a democratic general election. So the whole school becomes a polling station for the day, and every child has a ballot paper, and every family comes to vote. All day they're voting, every member of the community votes, and then the top 6 on the ballot paper become the values for that school. So they're not determined by anyone else apart from that community. Then they take, that's ownership, that is their own values. You know, I present in the books the values that we had at Hartford and so on. But then the idea is that everyone then obtains ones that are absolutely relevant to them. And that's the same with everything in the book and the concept. It gives ideas that build on existing practice and builds on and allows the flexibility to mold itself within people's different views, visions, strategies, priorities at the time. So that's what I really love. Is complete. It enables people to make a very bespoke, exciting process based on their own context. And Elaine, there's a lovely question from Elaine in the chat, if I may. The buy-in to the teachers in Uzbekistan with all this has actually come the other way around. They have created a reformed, what they call a reformed curriculum, which is going to go into practice from September. And they've just the government reformed the curriculum, and it's the most innovative, forward-looking, exciting curriculum that I have ever seen worldwide. Brings in so many aspects from different areas, but it's all based on values, on creative thinking, on lifelong learning, on philosophy, on the sustainability goals. You know, it's got everyone, children's rights, it's got everything. So they have already set that as their aim. And what's really exciting is now providing the ideas and the structures and the systems which would enable them to translate the theory and that's now a policy document into practice. So yeah, that's the really, really exciting process that we're going through with them.
That's fantastic. And then perhaps one final question from me. If anyone else has anything, please feel free to add it in. But I know we're already over your time. I'm wondering, how do you square this with the realities of today's system? You know, this is the joy of not knowing, but unfortunately we exist in systems where we value, with accountability results, knowing in a very specific sort of way. So how have you, in schools with systems, worked within existing structures to, you know, value lifelong, long-term learning, but also enable teachers, schools to not, in quotes, kind of fail in the eyes of today's metrics?
Yes, it's. I think it's the key to that, Adam. I think is in taking things one step at a time. And looking at what is already in place, what's already working, what's already part of the process, and taking one one area at a time to develop more exciting things. So for example, when I first joined at Hertford, we started really simply by changing the motto. The motto was I can. We changed it to I can, we can. So that was just all we did for a while, and that sent out the message that that it was all of us together creating things. Then we created spent a whole year creating a set of whole school values. So things, I think that the way that it's really exciting to encourage people to engage with innovation is to try and take one thing at a time. There's a really interesting way of enabling schools to engage in this process by creating what's called multi-professional teams. So the idea of multi-professional teams is that, you know, schools have a school development plan, and so they say they have 4 or 6 priorities in the school development plan. The idea is that on the first day of the academic year, that the learning to learn, all the staff, all the staff, support staff, admin staff, everyone joins one of those teams to move to then look after and take one of the school priorities forwards. So all year they form part of that team that is looking after the English or the maths or the learning priority, and they contribute to that as a multi-professional team. The children then join as well as learning leaders, which is really exciting. And then the children, through the learning leaders process and joining those teams, the children then produce their own version of the school development plan. So schools with the JONK approach have a main school development plan and a child version, which is so incredibly amazing. And then you can see how once that's created, that forms the basis, the infrastructure with which to see which is the next step that we all together want to focus on. And it gives everyone that kind of, rather than saying, now we're introducing this, or now we have to do that, it's a kind of, it fits in within the strategic vision of the school, and it takes one aspect at a time that everyone feels as an important aspect to focus on next.
And Elaine, I think you have a question?
Well, I wanted to just hopefully finger David Baker, who's in the audience, who's one of our PhD students. I don't know if you know him, Marcelo, but David, I'm sorry to pick on you, but David works alongside School 21. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yes, I know School 21.
In response to your question, Adam, you ought to talk to David. David, are you there? Are you willing to put your head above the parapet and just, yeah, good, he's there.
Hello, I was just making a cup of tea.
Oh, that's bad. So I'm just saying that
place here, huh?
I'm just saying that the work that you do with School 21 is really innovative. And Adam asked a question about how do you push back at all of the stuff that teachers are having to comply with. But I think your school is an example of how you can do that, can't you? Push back.
Yeah, I think so. But it's an ongoing battle, and it's one which, because we're an all through school, we're going all the way through from reception through to sixth form. It's very difficult to sustain. I mean, it's been very interesting, Marcelo, to hear in a primary context, and it's easier to do the kind of things that you're talking about at primary. We really, sustaining these ideas all the way through to GCSE and through to A-level is the hill that we continually have to climb. I mean, so much of it comes down to your hiring policy, the kind of people who you get to join your school, right from the outset. But it's been really exciting hearing it. I'm so sorry, I've actually got to scoot off to do something else. Elaine, you owe me. But But I'm sure, Marcelo, you know about Peter Hyman and all the things that we're doing at School 21. I mean, so much of what you're saying rings bells, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks, David. Sorry for
All right, David.
No, that's all right. No, I'm so sorry for playing hooky.
The other thing that comes to mind in terms of not for the teachers is, again, like I love the children to not feel worried. I also like the teachers to not feel worried and to not feel that they have to push back. So a really lovely way of doing that, Elaine, is to develop the concept of inquiry teams within the staff. So every term they form themselves into inquiry teams and inquire into something that they're interested in, without feeling the pressure that they need to push anything else back or that it's something imposed on them. And so, for example, if they want to introduce the lifelong learning dispositions, they would spend a whole term looking at how, doing a bit of research about what they are, how they might implement them, having a go at implementing them, chatting, seeing how they develop so differently, in early years to year 6, exchanging ideas, and then getting together and saying, yes, this is how I'm going to now carry on with that initiative. So I've always tried to make them feel that they're not having to, that things aren't onerous, but it's an organic way of always trying to make the experience with the children more and more exciting every day. And it's just amazing. So an example with those dispositions is that the year 1 children, for example, developed hats that they would all wear, because the dispositions are then linked to animals. So they'd wear like a resilient tortoise, or a creative spider, so that it's like the mantle of the expert. They feel that they're wearing something, and then they go and get it, and they feel that that's something really that's making them function as the disposition. But I think the idea of not imposing, but allowing the experimentation in the classroom, giving time, seeing how things develop, saying maybe this isn't quite right for us, but this is, and it's that kind of feeling of action, using their own kind of evidence-based approach to teaching and learning, I think is a really exciting way to approach the push back into the, all the pressures that come.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
And I think also in terms of the liberating that pressure, I think is I think the philosophical approach to teaching and learning also contributes enormously to opening up avenues and possibilities, and having those debates in the classroom, those discussions, those things that lead everyone to kind of feel that they are contributing towards building all the knowledge together and being equipped with ways that enables everyone to succeed. I think that also helps to remove those kind of perceived barriers or pressures.
Absolutely. That's so fantastic, Marcelo. Again, I know we've taken way too much of your time already. This is such a wonderful conversation. I'm so excited to have you back to collaborate in the future. I think that we could, use many more seminars on how to do this in practice, how the research underpins this, many more discussions to be had. I would really encourage everyone to get a copy of The Joy of Not Knowing, though, because there is just such a wealth of information, whether you're a researcher or a practitioner. It's incredibly step-by-step and has just so many ideas and discrete tools for making this work in practice. And you can do your own version of that PIT activity with whoever is around in your life. I will now say a big thank you to everyone. Say a thank you to Elaine, to Paula, to to Julie and to Olena, who helped to organize all of this. And a thank you to everyone for attending, and a massive thank you to Marcelo for sharing his wonderful time with us. Please, we will, if he's amenable, share his contact details and the link to purchase his book, and look forward to having everyone back soon for another CERIP event.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you, everyone. Been a great pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thank you.